Hello everyone, Revan619 here. How the devil are you? Before we talk about the changes to Idira, I think the most important thing to cover off is her augment. Yes, there have been operative changes and there is now a lot of scaling on their abilities, but what is most important for Idira is an item that she comes with in the prologue, which is the Grey Hood. Whenever perils of the warp are triggered because of Idira's actions, there is a chance they are not triggered, and this scaling is dependent on 10 plus your character's level. So 65 is the maximum here, and yes, it does help reduce it, though it doesn't actually change it too much overall. So there is actually a gambling factor involved here. You can give Idira the shimmering emulsion, but there have also been changes to the way Psyker's breastplate works. So Psyker's breastplate has also been nerfed. So Psyker's breastplate previously gave you 1 psi rating whenever you activated a psychic phenomenon or a perils of the warp. This was one of the ways that you could stack obscene amounts of psi rating pretty easily. Yes, that no longer happens. It only lowers the chance for Psychic Phenomenon, and you get +2 psi rating now when you trigger Perils of the Warp, which for Idira seems to always be the instant death demon. They've also reworked Warp Buffer a little bit, so if we move over into the features and have a quick little look at Warp Buffer, the talent itself has changed and has had a little wording update. So if the Overseer is within 4 cells of the Cyber-Raven, whenever the Overseer triggers a Perils of the Warp, it affects a random enemy inside that area instead of the Overseer. Exceptionally powerful enemies can be immune to the insta-kill effects. If there are no enemies in this area, Perils of the Warp affects the Overseer as usual. On 1.5, this was also bugged. The bug was the Overseer itself didn't even need to be in the area of the Cyber-Raven. The Cyber-Raven could be on the other side of the map, and if there was an enemy inside the bubble, they would pass the peril to that enemy, though I've not really had time to test this as much in the current base version of the game. So it's one of those things where there is a chance that this could be having a lot of effect, and I've just not really had time to really check it out. But you will be able to see a little bit more with that. So the other thing we're going to need to talk about before we even get into the build is how operatives actually work in general. So if we actually look at some of these operative talents, you'll notice that Fresh Target now has scaling on it, so buffs will benefit the operative. Tide of Excellence now works more consistently. The bug for area and burst attacks not consuming exploits has been fixed. So this is technically a operative nerf, but it's also operative now working as intended, which means burst and area attacks will be able to proc Tide of Excellence and they will consume those exploits, which means burst will now use the exploits on the first attack, not for the full burst. Ballistics calculation now also has scaling, so it's one of those things that your operative will now benefit from buffs. Comprehensive analysis now also has scaling, and so does continuous analysis also has scaling. So these talents all got massively stronger, and even something like reactive study now also has scaling. So it's going to be one of those things where these talents are a lot more useful. Other things didn't change as much, but operatives now also gain exploits on extra turns, as do assassins, but we'll come back to that later. This build that we're going to be focusing on today is going to be the Cyber-Raven version, but the pure arc rifle version of Idira, a lot stronger. But for now, I know everyone clicking this build is going to be wanting to see only Psyker powers, so the way that I build Idira this time is different to my previous build, where I don't even touch arc rifles, I don't touch sniper rifles, which are her much stronger options, and this is going to be a purely Psyker-based Primaris Witch build. As with the Abelard video, the video for Idira and this build video for DLC 3 is being recorded before release, so some things could slightly change. However, I also wanted to focus more on the why I'm doing what I do and less on trying to give a one-for-one guide. And for members, I'll have sheets up, and hopefully after the weekend I'll have public sheets ready. But like I said, I'm going to be away this weekend, so I won't be back till Monday to even start getting that fully updated for public release. So let's have a look at what's going on here. So for those of you who don't know, Analyze Enemy is a way that the operative can add exploits. At the start of the operative's turn, they give an exploit to everyone in their line of sight. With upgrades, they can give it to the whole map. This will now apply on extra turns. This change basically enables Operative Kit to work. In the previous meta, Operative didn't even get to really use its tier 1. So Analyze Enemies will give you a stacking amount of exploits to enemies, and then your attacks will do extra damage based on the number of exploits. So it doesn't scale too hard, but it is something that you will notice a lot of difference in your damage now. The first one that I take for the prologue for Idira is actually Tide of Excellence. This is going to be because proccing those exploits will actually build up her arm penetration, her damage very quickly. So it's one of the most useful talents to get up, and yes, your Psyker staff powers will also proc up those exploits, because the way lightning staff works and the lightning abilities is it counts as all single attacks. So it will actually benefit from anything that benefits from single attacks, but this will chain around and it will proc up exploits. You hit 5 enemies with that lightning staff, you'll get 5 stacks of Tide of Excellence. Idira comes locked at rank 2, so without mods and cheat tools you can't respec her, so you will be stuck with this rank 2 awareness. Now, so many of your companions actually cover awareness. If you actually have a look on the left here, I haven't been leveling her awareness, but Argenta covers awareness, Ulfar covers awareness, Cassia covers awareness, Kibella covers awareness, and most of them I've been trying to manage without overlapping each other. So for Idira, you could actually make her your main person to cover awareness, and you could put in all of your talents here, but I've not really done that because obviously awareness is going to be tied to your highest perception, and Idira I'm not focusing on perception, I'm mostly focused on willpower first. The level stats that I'm going to go with her is going to be willpower because that increases her psycho damage, intelligence because that increases the amount of exploits she applies, and perception because that increases how much she benefits from those exploits, and then there are other benefits from other talents that will come along the way. So at rank 5, I actually increase her perception so we can get 1 extra cell range from Second Sight. Second Sight will increase the distance that you can input out your Psyker powers based on your perception. So that first rank into perception will actually increase how much this goes. At rank 6, I take Uncanny Sight because the more operatives you have and the more that are taking turns, the more that they will stack exploits. Multiple operatives will actually help benefit other operatives, because even if you don't attack a target, you'll all passively stack exploits. And if you're also throwing out analyze enemies, you can create a big stack on, say, a boss or another enemy for use of other abilities. Willpower is then what I'll focus on, because obviously it's going to be her damaging. Normally, I suggest you use the Long Las in Act 1 and Ballistic Skill to not risk the chance of Idira exploding and dying, but we're just going to go full balls to the wall for this version of the build, and we're going all Psyker powers, baby. We're not even risking ourselves the ability to survive encounters by not going full Psyker powers. At rank 7, I take Pyromancy. This is mostly going to be just to get access to those passives, because they're going to be incredibly useful. I take point into Medicaid. This 1 point will now allow us to use Medicaid kits. Very important. I did my whole unfair run without a Grand Strategist, so I was actually taking damage, so having allies that could use Medicaid was very important for me. Rank 8, we take Pain Channeling and Backdraft. This is huge. What Backdraft does is whenever a Psyker power used by the Psyker deals damage, a random enemy within 2 cells from the initial target suffers half the damage. That damage does not trigger this talent again. And then you've also got Pain Channeling. Whenever the Psyker kills an enemy with a Psyker power, dealing more damage than the target's wounds, excess damage will be dealt to the closest to the target. These two are pretty huge, because when you use your lightning staff and you hit multiple enemies, it will proc both of them multiple times, and it will wipe out whole chunks of the map. This is also very useful with Santic powers, where you use something like Wrath of the Emperor. However, for this build, whilst yes, the best way to use Idira is to stack every buffer in the game, stack every source of willpower in the game, and give her the Sanctified Staff, there is a clickbaiter YouTuber who will recommend this playstyle, but I purposely believe that that is the worst way to use Idira. Mostly because if she does explode, then your entire party that's dedicated to buffing her now can't do it, and then that's just a reload. And I'm not someone who believes in multiple save scumming to get through encounters, so I am not building Idira for Santic, and because for lore reasons, a lot of people complain that I gave the unsanctioned psych Santic powers, which I don't want to get into in a build video, but yeah, no, Santic is still going to be a very strong option for her, but it's not going to be one that I'm going to be doing for this build. Dismantling Attack upgrade 3 is also very useful for her. Dismantling Attack immediately all enemies within a 5-cell radius around the target, reducing their dodge and armor by 50% till the end of the turn. Early on, you will only have access to the Psychic Staff, so put in the Long Lads in her secondary will still be useful for using Dismantling Attack to be able to cripple some enemies. I start taking Law Warp because not many people can really cover Law Warp. Cassia, I actually had to take 2 late game talents to even get her to 145 for Law Warp, but as you can see here, yeah, everyone in the party kind of struggles to cover Law Warp. So Idira, for most of the game, will actually have the highest Law Warp, so when you use that for disabling like warp traps and obviously engaging with some other things in the DLCs, yeah, Idira will be the one to do that. We get some more willpower. Rank 11, we take Bliss's calculation. Again, this will apply to Psyker powers that are used at range. So this is a very good damage buff, and it can proc multiple times as long as enemies have exploits, and those exploits are more likely to be there because of the operative changes. More Lord Xenos. Again, Lord Xenos is one of those ones where most companions can't really cover it. Heinrich's has a lot of base boost to it, but you don't increase his intelligence, so he struggles. And my Pascal, the only reason he's got so high is I purposely was covering Lord Xenos on Pascal so I could use Eogun, because Eogun has his talents, even though he is an officer and fellowship based, he has a lot of his stuff tied to intelligence, and he needs to use tech use and logic for a lot of his augments. Pascal also uses a lot of tech use for his augments, but he doesn't use logic, so I changed Pascal to cover Lord Xenos. But like I said, for most of the game, Idira will actually be covering those checks. Rank 12, we take biomancy. Biomancy is good because it gives us Iron Arm, which is one of the best buffs ever, and it's going to be very useful for as we go into our Overseer archetype, and it will also open up some passives. Psyker Minoris, yeah, Idira gets this a little bit late. She actually gets stronger slower than a regular Sanctioned Psyker. You could give her Shimmering Emulsion to boost this. I don't recommend it, but it won't impact you any more than will a Sanctioned Psyker. Idira's always on peril effects, will not be impacted by Shimmering Emulsion, but yeah, she is also just deadly to use anyway. Fresh target, also going to be more useful because if Idira is getting buffed, this does more, and it's very good for one-shotting things, and then all that excess damage will trigger with backdraft and pain channeling, so yes, very, very useful. Then rank 14, we take Melting Armor. Melting Armor is still highly inconsistent, so every time an enemy suffers damage from the Psyker, that enemy's armor is reduced by 5%. If the enemy's armor is already 0, their deflection will reduce instead. This used to be very good because you could just infinitely reduce enemies' armor and then start reducing their deflection, but then a hidden 20% cap got added where you could only reduce 20% enemy armor no matter what the arm was, and then it would hit deflection. Now it's seemingly random. The number that it will apply is, yeah, like I said, seemingly random before it will start going to deflection. So it's a very inconsistent talent. If you want to trade a talent, this will be the one to do it. More intelligence, and then dismantling attack upgrade 2, because again, this can just really help cripple. You get this on Aurora for the Act 1 boss. Yeah, he is going to struggle. Augments is a bit of a mixed bag. There are a lot of augments that can give some very good effects, like when you're in cover and enemies attack cover, that they instead get exploits if they didn't hit you. This is something you can put on the leg slot, though I found a lot of them didn't add very much for Idira. Some of them would add like toxin on the effect of your attacks, which again it would normally apply to weapon attacks, and there was stuff like enemies hit by her would cause lightning off, but a lot of these were very harmful to allies, so I hadn't really thought about min-maxing them too much. One of the ones I did like for her was the Cerebral Hollow Ocular for the Operative, which is if the user moved during their turn, for every 10 points of their perception, bonus 1 Tactical Simulacrum appears in a random cell adjacent to their current position. Tactical Simulacrum's wounds are equal to 1, and it cannot dodge, parry, or block or take cover. The enemy that destroys Simulacrum suffers 6 stacks of Operatives. What it does is it creates a fake copy of yourself next to yourself, and enemies do seem to prioritize them. It's quite useful because it's another way to stack up exploits, but if you're one-turning, most of the augments didn't actually come into effect on her. There are some ones where you can change things to scale from your intelligence and stuff, but then you would lose access to her next slot, which we don't really want to be doing that. Like, yeah, this grey hood is the only thing that's keeping Idira usable, and even then, it's only a chance to be usable. But as you can see, when you take it off, you obviously get a default implant here, so you don't really want to be playing around with that, and you do just want to be keeping her grey hood. As for the other ones, I'll leave you to experiment with them, and I will do a little bit more in the future, and we'll have some more updates where I talk about what is the way to min-max augments for Idira, but most of them, they're going to be kind of gimmicky. Stuff like, yeah, toxin on weapon hits, which again, she's not really going to be using weapon hits. Stuff like range Medicaid, and obviously not having minuses from injections and stuff like that. It's one of those things, a bit gimmicky. Some of the stuff like the weapon optimizer, again, it only applies to weapon type attacks, but there are some other things that you can use on here, but it all really comes down to what your flavor is and for how you're using her, so it's going to be very hard for me to guide you on that unless I'm actually taking turns and playing your build for you. In Act 1, you do have access to the Psychic Body Glove. This one is going to be quite useful to gain more dodge, but it's not going to be your best option for Idira because a lot of the augments that you could use actually reduce her dodge as well. So whilst I take peak condition in Exemplar levels, so I can take heavy armor proficiency to take the Psyker's breastplate, if you didn't want to go that route, there are other options that you can use for armors, but you won't see them till later. So for Act 1, Psychic Body Glove is probably going to be the way to go, and then you'll probably be looking at a lot of medium armors in the later acts. One of the ones that I found quite useful was obviously the Chaos Light Enforcer Carapace because it increases her toughness, and it was just a very high armor deflection. There aren't too many options for Idira that are all that useful because a lot of the very useful items you're going to want to prioritize onto other more combat focused allies that are going to be sort of up front. But with Idira, you do definitely want to get that Psyker's body glove, and then you're going to decide if you do want to go for heavy armor or not. Early game, the Long Lads is going to be very good for Idira because it has dodge reduction and additional hit chance. This will get around her very low ballistic skill. Now, this is the upgrade to it, which you will see in Act 4. But the Long Lads, like I said, it's going to be very useful to have in a secondary slot for Idira. In the prologue, you're going to use something like a scrap autogun, or if you play an Operative, you'll have access to 2 sniper rifles, so you'll be able to give Idira one of the 2 sniper rifles. In Act 1, probably the best staff to give Idira is the Charged Staff. However, this is very missable. You get a one-off tech use check to be able to get it, and if you fail this check, which you can do even at 90% like I've done on previous streams, then you do lose access to any staff upgrade for Idira in Act 1. The Charged Staff will be the only lightning staff that you have access to until Act 4, and you're going to be mostly relying on biomancy staffs for single target. Telepathy staffs are very unreliable, and they removed the telepath staff from Act 1 now. And because we're not going down the route of Santic, we're not going to be able to abuse the Sanctified Staff, which is still the strongest staff in the game. The way that staff works is you stack as much resolve to your Psyker, and then you do blasts. There is stuff like Personal Oversight that will increase the stacks of resolve in the Psyker for every time an officer targets him. There are a lot of clickbait YouTube videos, and ones that I had even done myself, where I had done a 100k AoE hit with Idira, but you don't need to hit those numbers, and even trying to do so risks Idira exploding, and if Idira explodes and then your party is just, well, yeah, you've got a party full of buffers that now can't do anything, that's a reload. So that's why I'm not focusing on that route, though I will show off min-max versions of Idira in the future, which again is going to be based around Assassin and Lightning Rifles. Lightning Rifle Assassin, which is still in the 1.5 build spreadsheet, you're going to want to move some stuff around because of the way the Operative talents have worked, but that is still going to be Idira's strongest option. But as you can see here, look at our little cybernetic booties. Okay, so we're going to go on and we're going to talk a little bit about the Tier 2. So the best pet in the game is the Cybraven. It is one of the most exceptional ones because the damage pets are all kind of mediocre. The reason they're mediocre is they can never upgrade their initial weapons. So whilst you can get protocols that can give them, say, 300% extra damage, that's still 300% of 11 damage. Because they never increase, that means the pets themselves are always fairly weak. The other issue with pets is they don't enhance your Tier 1. Besides the Cybraven, because you're mostly going to be focusing on your Psyker talents, it's absolutely fine that the Tier 2 doesn't really benefit you. The only other person who has something like this is Eogun with the Skull pet, but that's going to be saved for the Eogun video. What we're going to focus on here is trying to boost up Idira as much as possible. So we start off with the Cybraven, then we get Strategic Adaptation. Now, Strategic Adaptation, if your pet has above 50% wounds, you deal extra damage on your next attack, and if that attack kills a target, it does not count towards the attack limit, and the Overseer regains any AP spent on it. So as long as you kill on your attack, it's basically a free attack, so this is going to be the first ability we want. We're then going to take Warp Buffer. Whilst this will not save Idira for the insta-death effects, because for some reason Sanctioned Psyker can't, it will pass other perils to enemies. However, you're going to want to be careful, because normally when you're going to be using the Cybraven is when all your allies are stacked up at the start of combat, which means you're going to be at risk of just exploding even if there are enemies within there, and so you're going to have to be very careful about how you use Idira, and just keep in mind you can't just freely spam powers. Because she is unsanctioned, she will explode and die. It is more than 5% chance. It happens way too much to just be 5%, or maybe that's just true RNG and I have bias against it because it has wiped my party in the past. Rank 5, I start increasing with Idira's willpower, and then we get access to Psyker Majoris, which will increase her psi rating, which increases her buffs and increases her damage. At rank 7, we finally pick up Enfeeble. Enfeeble is a nice penalty to enemies' strength and agility, and it increases the damage that they receive. It's also a minor power, so very good for sanctioned Psykers, because it means they never pick up issues. This is something that we need to take to be able to take warp speed, so that's one of the reasons why we take that here. Psi Resonator will increase the power of our relayed powers, so that Iron Arm buff is going to count as one Psyker level higher. Thriving in Peril is a way that we can gain momentum from our perils, so this is very useful for the party and for getting heroic actions. We then take Fatebringer. Fatebringer is going to be very useful here because there are a lot of high armored enemies in the DLC. So allies under the effects of one psychic power get additional armor penetration. So this is useful to when you iron arm the entire party, you give the entire party armor penetration. We then take Small Perception, Small Law Warp. We go for the upgrade 2 because when you relay attacking powers through the Raven, which is kind of what the heroic action even does with the Cyber Raven, yeah, this plus 30 to its characteristics one round will actually boost up all the damage of what it does for when you relay powers through it. Rite of Calibration means that you can use Pain Bond on the Cyber Raven a little bit easier. Now, Pain Bond isn't something that I had talked about just yet, but we should quickly go over it. So, the Cyber Raven has the ability Purification Discharge. Cyber Raven deals shock damage to the 3 closest enemies in the 4-cell radius around it. Shock damage is incredibly powerful in this update to the game because, yeah, the way they change things, yeah, it's exceptionally powerful. What it will also do is it will also give a passive called Pain Bond. So, the way Purification Discharge is used, the affected targets suffer bonds of pain. So what bonds of pain does is this creature is connected to the Cyber Raven. When this creature suffers the next instance of damage, Familiar's willpower is divided by 3% of that damage, up to a maximum of 100% will be dealt to all the connected targets as mental damage. So this will apply an AoE damage to all of those enemies, and it will actually get boosted by all of your boosters again. So stuff like Degraded Defense, Warp Mines will actually then enhance this damage that relayed. Degraded Defense has been nerfed. So previously, when you had 1,000 stacks of Degraded Defense, when you use this would actually make the bonds of pain damage much higher than the initial damage. And especially if you're using something like the Wrath the Emperor setup, then yeah, you would do exceptionally huge AoE nukes. Now, because this has been nerfed, and obviously bonds of pain is only usable once per turn, and that's not per round, per turn. It means that it's not as useful as it was, but it's still an exceptionally powerful upgrade to be using here. After getting upgrade 2, we obviously take Rite of Calibration, so the first Overseer ability used in combat is 1 AP less. This can be to either move it or to use Purification Discharge. We then also get Fire Within. Every time the Psyker kills or scores a critical hit against 8 creatures in one combat, the Psyker's next attack, including attacking Psyker powers, will cost 0 AP and will not count towards the attack limit, so it's another way to increase some of our attack economy here. We then get some more intelligence and some more Zenus, but then we take Warp Speed. Now this is an exceptionally powerful buff. Until the end of combat, the target ally increases their MP by 10 and their agility by 19 and their AP by 1. Obviously any buffs on yourself will increase what you do here, but what is mostly important is the fact that you can get out AoE buffs to get up your allies. This is coming a little bit later than we would like because obviously Idira is unsanctioned, which means trying to use her as your main buffer is incredibly risky because that means at the start of combat you just risk failing the combat. However, getting this later when you can mitigate some of those perils a little bit more and you have higher chances to not trigger them is a lot more useful. I then take Cascading Echoes, so any powers that you target on the Raven, so it transmits as AoE, get increased by 1 for Psi rating, so it makes them stronger. We then take Psyker Terminus, so we increase our Psi rating even more to up our powers and our buffs. Because we now have access to more buffs, so we're going to be using Iron Arm and Warp Speed, we also take Warp Saturation. When the Psyker's allies or the Psyker themselves are under the effects of Psyker powers, they gain 5 toughness for each of these effects. Very useful for your frontline fighters, and it will help Idira take a few hits, though not that many. And then we get Weak Hearts. Enemies suffering from the blinded, stunned, immobilized, or prone effects inflicted by the Psyker suffer 10 more damage. Now this is to set up for what we're going to take in the next area, which is actually going to be sensory deprivation. When it comes to the itemization of Idira, Act 2 has a lot of very powerful items. Some of them, like the Experimental Scientifier, was a big item from DLC 2, but it wasn't really working, so it appears to be working now, but more testing is going to be required. But the first psychic power that you use in combat will get a +3. Another useful one here is the Psyker's Footwear. If you're in light armor, this is going to be very good for stacking dodge, though you will probably want to change this to some Act 4 boots that you get. Whilst we do get access to Psyker's Breastplate in Act 2, I tend not to use it to Act 4 when you can obviously take heavy arm efficiency in taking your Exemplar levels, and other items that are going to be more useful will actually come in Act 4, such as the Vortex Pendant and the Ghost Helm. But you'll also in Act 3 get access to items like the Blood Drinker Staff. However, most of the OP Act 2 items I'm actually using on Heinrichs, which Idira could also use. This is going to be the Spirit Drape, which is the wearer's non-attacking psychic powers cost -1 AP less during the wearer's first turn of combat. If you intend to main party Idira, you definitely want to use the Spirit Drape. The other one is the Warp Surge Brooch. On their first non-extra turn in combat, the wearer gains a number of additional attacks equal to their psi rating. Again, if you want to main party Idira, you're going to want to use this, so you're going to be wanting to think about bringing that over. At the moment on Idira, I do have Grimoire of the Void because it is useful for doing extra warp damage, but it only applies to warp damage. Mental damage does not count for this, so this will be for people that are using stuff like Sanctified Staff if you do go down the Santic route, and the way that you do that with Idira is to not focus on going for Enfeeble or Warp Speed, and then to get Sensory Deprivation maybe earlier, maybe go for Psychic Assault earlier, or just pick up Santic powers instead of going down the biomancy route at all, which again will open access to Sanctified Staff, but it is still usable with your biomancy staffs. The big item for Idira is going to be unique to Idira or any unsanctioned Psykers, which is the Warp Conductor Gloves. After triggering a psychic phenomena or perils of the warp, the wearer's psi rating is increased by 1 until the end of combat. The wearer gains momentum and temporary wounds equal to their resolve, so obviously buffing resolve is very useful for here, and as you can see why people like to go down the route of using the Sanctified Staff version of Idira, because there is ways to really abuse resolve with her, though like I said, it is very risky because if you're trying to set her up and she explodes, well then that's just the life you're going to have to live with. As we prepare to start talking about Exemplar and moving into later levels, some of the things that will change Idira is obviously getting access to the Blood Drinker Staff will increase her psi rating by 2. Heinrichs is also using the Star Mist Staff, which it does increase your psi rating by 2, so if you are looking to stack up for Idira, you might want to put those items on over here. Staff and Shock and Orb will also come in Act 2, which is going to be one of your main damaging tools, unless you're still using the Sanctified Staff. Yes, I am talking about that build a lot. And you will also pick up the Boots of Decay, which will lower enemies' deflection, though that isn't as useful, but combining that with your melting armor means that you're going to be doing a good job at lowering enemies' armor, giving your allies armor pen, and obviously lowering enemy deflection. So let's start talking about the end game for Idira. As you can see, I have changed my approach to going into her Exemplar levels. So I start off with Degraded Defense, which has been heavily nerfed by about 90% now. So whereas previously that this could stack up to 1000, so you'd do 1000 divided by 6 extra damage, now you only do up to 100 stacks of extra percentage damage. So it's a lot less than what it was before. Continuous analysis, because of the scaling properties, is obviously going to be more useful, so we do pick in and go into that earlier. I take some more Lorzinos, and then I get enhanced augmetics. This is going to be for when you're using overcharge protocols, when you're relaying powers through your Raven, you'll actually use the Raven stats, so having it have high willpower is going to be quite useful. We were also going to take Sacrificial Penance, because early on in the tier 2, I don't really focus on overcharge protocols, but in the later acts, it becomes a lot more useful. I also pick up Aftershock because we're going to be using the Raven more, and we're also going to be using mental damage more because we're going to be picking up Psychic Assault. Picking up Aftershock is going to be useful to start building up some other things. We then take Sensory Deprivation. This will enable Weak Hearts that, yes, I know we took a little bit early, but it's going to be in preparation for having it ready to go with other talents. But this means that we'll do an extra 10% damage boost as well as blinding enemies. It will also apply other effects from other talents going on. The rank 5, I take Peak Condition. This this is going to be so that we have enough strength to be able to equip heavy armor and to take the talent. Psyker Extremist will also give us another 1 psi rating here, which will complete that part. We'll start increasing more willpower, and we'll also take comprehensive analysis. Because of the new scaling, this means that we will be able to be putting out a lot more exploits than we were before. So both of them, you'll be seeing a potential +6 there, and if you've had officer buffs, even more. Rank 7, we take Psychic Assault. Now, when I'm main character as a damage dealer, I take this a lot earlier, whereas Idira, I like to focus on the Psychic stuff, but this will be another Cone Shriek that will be quite useful. Just be careful not to hit allies and even your own Cyber Raven. As we're getting ready to start using the Cyber Raven and transmitting powers, the Sacrificial Penance, every time you transmit, will actually increase its willpower and take damage. There are pet protocols that can counteract this, though you won't need to worry about this as much later game. If I was doing this earlier game, I would take this talent earlier. Heavy armor efficiency, so we can get on Psyker's breastplate, so we should be able to use this in Act 3. We then take Small Lord Xenos and Malign Influence, so we'll do extra damage every time enemies fail willpower tests, and it won't be as boosted as it is for assassin. This is really good for an assassin, but it's just something that's a little bit extra useful. Weak body, weak soul will reduce enemies' toughness and willpower, so that means that as you build up exploits, you will debuff them and it will reduce their HP. Taking on Small Law Warp, and Instant Exposure. This is going to be to remove the AP cost from exposed weakness, and we will be using this a lot more now. Iron Eye grenades are still better, but it is a free use that we will have, and if you're stacking operatives with extra turns, it's going to be quite useful. Mind Siege is going to be another one. Enemies that have failed willpower resistant tests against any of Psyker's powers suffer an additional 24 direct damage every time they suffer mental damage. And we are now stacking some mental damage. Taking some more intelligence and perception, and we're going to be starting to move into awareness. The reason is we have maximized our other skill checks, so this is going to be sort of left over. You won't be able to main party coverage this, but it's either that or Medicaid. Taking Extermination, because later on we are going to be making a lot more attacks again. Those +1 damages are going to be quite useful. Warp Mines is going to be another one that we can get some AoE debuffs. This isn't a talent that we prioritize early, and we take it towards the later game where it's obviously less vital. Brother-in-Arms will also just give passive resolve, so it's nice to have, though we are again not using resolve abusing build, though we do take some awareness. Passive Learning is one of those ones where it's only useful when you are starting up front, so it's not one that we need to prioritize in Idira, because you tend not to start right at the front. A good one is going to be Motive Force Overload. We don't really take augments on Idira till Act 4, so saving this talent till later is just another way to generate some AP, which is quite useful for her. Now, the final talent you can take here, currently I have Metabolic Overcharge because I like to give allies an extra turn, and it will also be very useful for just making Idira less of a liability, because it will have the allies taking the turn instead. Now, this rank 18 is where if you want to use the Cyber Raven with overcharge protocols, you want to take Mind Bond. Mind Bond will allow you to take over an enemy, and they will try to attack each other and take damage at the end. I've not found this strategy to be too effective, but Mind Bond does work now, and enemies will attack each other. So if you want to take Mind Bond at rank 18 instead, that's going to be your option, though I prefer to take Metabolic Overcharge. Takes more Perception. We then take Eager for Battle, so for that first turn we get 2 extra action points, and that will also apply to the Defiance Tower, so that's very good. And the final one is going to be Combat Insight. This is just metagaming for the final boss. You just ignore his deflection, because when you have buffs and you have, when your perception bonus is at 10, so that means you have 100 perception, you ignore enemies' deflection, so you will have that against the final boss. I think Idira passively has 80 at this point, so just a voice of command will boost you over 100. And so yes, pure metagaming talent to take on the boss, and that will sort of complete the build that we're going for Idira here. So let's talk a little bit about her rotations, and then we can just let you all get on and enjoy it. Naturally, Idira has a lot more powers than most people and a lot more actions that you're going to be worrying about. Like I said previously, the way I built Idira is either using arc rifles and completely ignoring her Psyker kit because she was very unreliable, or using just something like a long layers early game. I still do recommend using a long layers early game because it will help you deal with some initial damage, but it's not one that I've built into because I don't really build up her ballistic skill. Ballistic skill is something that was incredibly important to Idira because you were using Psychic Barrage to get extra damage, and you were also, like I said, trying to use sniper rifles more to not be as much of a burden to the rest of the party. But sort of what you will try to do is, if you have a big group of enemies, you will try to analyze one of them, and then you'll go for a lightning staff attack from your lightning staff, which will then proc multiple instances of Tide of Excellence. If there is a buff, you're going to want to use Exposed Weakness to try and lower their dodge at parry and armor, so it will allow your party to get in there. And as you move into the tier 2, you're going to actually move the Cyber Raven up. You're going to start off with a Purification Discharge, and then you'll use something like a Psychic Scream, or you'll try to lightning around the Raven without actually hitting it. So you're going to have to be very careful. You will see in the preview if your lightning staff powers will hit the Raven, but worst case, you can also use the biomancy staff powers to therefore target an individual and not even risk your Raven. When you do start to buff, you will have your Raven around you in the party. You will use something like Iron Armor and probably use Warp Speed. With the Spirit Drape, it will lower it by 1, so those buffs will be free, besides Warp Speed, which will cost 1 AP, and then you can move the Raven up to use Sensory Deprivation to blind a bunch of enemies to increase the damage that you do, drop your Purification Discharge, Enfeeble some of the key ones here. You could even do that, well actually you probably should Enfeeble before you move the Raven up and drop Purification Discharge, because yeah, the way the effect works. Then you can obviously do some really big damage with her. She is quite useful for that, and like I said, if you're going to kill before you do your attack, you're going to want to use Strategic Adaptation, because it will refund your attack economy and it will give you another attack. If you then go for enough kills to be able to get off your Fire Within, this will also increase your attack economy. Another really good talent, ability for just picking off individuals is going to be Ignite. This is going to be a way that you can deal a lot of damage, and if enemies are clustered up, it is going to be very effective because of stuff like Backdraft and Pain Channeling. But that's going to be sort of how you play Idira. As I said, as you get to the end game, you're going to be able to be moving into stuff like Side Express Play and the Ghost Helm. Ghost Helm I've not talked about too much, but what it does is it allows you to use willpower for dodge tests instead of agility, and whenever the wearer dodges an enemy attack, they gain 1 psi rating until the end of their next turn, and it stacks. This previously was working with allied attacks, so people would get a Argented up to about 50 rate of fire 50 shots at Idira, which they would use controlled shots, make her avoid, or even the Iconoclast upgrade 5, and then they would stack incredibly high psi rating. Now, I've not really tested to see if this still works in this patch, because it's not a strategy I've liked, because the amount of buffs required to be able to get Argented to have that rate of fire meant it wasn't even worth using Idira. There is a lot of clickbait YouTube strategies that you can use, but I'm not that kind of YouTuber, so I'm not going to try and convince you that that's going to be the way to play her. But having items like Vortex Pendant to increase her willpower as you buff up your allies at the start, move the Raven up after you've done an Enfeeble, and then use Discharge and you drop this, yeah, Idira will do exceptionally high damage. A Sanctioned Psyker version is still better, and Idira using arc rifles, because arc rifles are just very powerful for Operative Assassin in this DLC update, that could actually be a better way to run her than have no powers at all. But that just all comes down to using Idira is actually a risk. All Psykers really should work like Idira and should always risk powers. They just don't at the moment. Sanctioned Psykers are incredibly safe, and as long as you're not using major powers by 15 Veil, they never explode and die, whereas Idira always has that extra fun of possibly exploding and dying. Anyway, I've been Revan619. That's been all I've got for you for Idira. The old 1.5 spreadsheet will be linked below, and as soon as the DLC 3 spreadsheet is updated and posted, I will also link that below. But you will be able to get access to bits of that if you just either come into the Discord and ask me about it, or join the membership, and you'll be able to access all of my YouTube notes and all of my route notes, because that's one of those membership benefits. I'll see you next time, and thanks for stopping by.